In this video, we're going to be looking at one of the common enemies that can sabotage your decision making and what you can do about it so that you never get caught off guard again. Hey friend, Javi Cuadrado here. Whether you're an entrepreneur, a business owner, or a leader in your organization, I'm here to help you amplify your results, grow your business, and create lasting impact. If you're new here, make sure to click that subscribe button, and all the links to everything I'm going to share, I will put in the description box below. With that, let's jump in. Decision making plays a critical role in getting better outcomes and amplifying your results. This is true whether you're an entrepreneur, a business owner, or you're just trying to improve your own performance. Simply put, the results that you get will be directly proportional to the quality of the decisions you make. But did you know that there are several enemies that, if left unchecked, can sabotage your decision making and your success? Today, I'll be looking at one of those common enemies and what you can do about it. Today, we'll be talking about optimism bias. So what is optimism bias? Well, it's a tendency to believe that the chances of something positive happening to us are greater than our peers, and the chances of something negative happening to us are lower than our peers. So a few years ago, researchers at Oxford University studied Olympic spending over a 50+ year period. So basically they looked at what people estimated their budgets were gonna be versus what was actually spent. And you know what they found? Turns out the Olympics actually have the highest cost overrun, that's how much was spent versus how much was budgeted, of any type of mega project globally. On average, they spent over 150% more than what they budgeted. So on average, they budgeted about $2 billion. They spent over $3 billion extra beyond that for a total of $5 billion on average. On top of that, over the entire 56-year time period that they studied, every single time they went over budget. That's mind-blowing. Now, I want you to imagine sitting in one of those budgetary committee meetings and hearing someone say, listen, I know everyone else has gone over budget over the last 50+ years, but that's not gonna happen to us. That would be an example of optimism bias. Now, I know this is an extreme example, but optimism bias is actually a lot more pervasive than you might think. Cognitive neuroscientist Tali Sharot has done a lot of research on this, and what she's found is that optimism bias is actually pretty widespread across cultures across the world. Now, I need to pause and clarify something. I am not anti-optimism. In fact, optimism is a wonderful thing. Many of the organizations that exist today that create incredible value for customers and society, they wouldn't exist if it hadn't been for the optimism of their founders or their leaders. The difference with optimism bias is that too much optimism can distort reality and cause issues. Think of optimism as red wine. A glass a day is great for the heart, but guzzling a whole bottle can lead to problems. So what are some examples where optimism bias can cause problems? Well, as an individual, it might be that you decide not to wear your seatbelt when you go out because you just don't think that you're at risk of getting in an accident. It might mean that you skip your annual physical exam with your doctor because you don't think that you're going to have any health issues, either short-term or in the long term. Or it might mean that you don't put any savings into an emergency savings account because you overestimate your job security. Now, if you're in an organization, it might look something like this. Not creating a risk management plan that incorporates different scenarios because honestly, you underestimate the kinds of risks that your organization can face. Or it could look like underestimating budgets or timeframes or making unrealistic commitments to your customers. Think of the Olympic example that I shared earlier. Or it could look like overestimating the chances of success of a big investment that you make in your business, whether it's a merger, an acquisition, or a big capital investment, and not having any contingencies built in. Optimism bias often leads to the failure of anticipating risk, and it could have real consequences for real people. It could cause serious health risk that compromises your well-being. It could cause serious financial risk that compromises your ability to provide for your family short-term and in the long term. And it can cause serious business risk that could eventually lead to laying people off, or even worse, shutting your doors as a business. So nobody, trust me, nobody wants to be in that position. So what can you do to counter this? Well, here are 3 pro tips that can help you and your team overcome optimism bias. Tip number 1 is to incorporate diverse perspectives. So as a general rule of thumb, when you reach out and incorporate perspectives from people that are different from you, it can really help you open up to your blind spots, and generally it helps your decision making be a lot more robust. So if you have 20 plus years of experience in a certain industry, try reaching out to someone who maybe just started or just entered your industry. Or if you're brand new to the industry, maybe do the opposite and try reaching out to someone who's been around for a long time. If most of your experience is in finance or in sales, try reaching out to someone maybe in supply chain or manufacturing or R&D to get a more rounded perspective. Or if you notice that you or your leadership team or the people you surround yourself with to make decisions are mainly of a particular gender or a particular race, or share a similar upbringing, or maybe they're around the same age, try reaching out to people who are opposite or different, because again, trust me, you're gonna thank me later. It will help your decision making. Tip number 2 is to take an outside view. I want you to imagine that you were just hired as a consultant to help a company work through an idea or a project that's actually very similar to the one that you had. But how would you approach this if it wasn't your idea and someone else's? If you were a consultant, chances are you might look at benchmarking, you might look at historical success rates, you might look at the data that is relevant to this particular application or this particular project. And the reality is that you might make a much more rational decision based on data, because you're making a recommendation that really you want to ensure the success of your client. So if you're doing that for somebody else, why not do it for your own idea? By taking an outside view and pretending that it's for somebody else, it actually helps you make a much more rational decision. Tip number 3 is to conduct a pre-mortem. Now, you might have heard of a post-mortem, or what some people like to call a lessons learned, which is typically something that you do after a project has been finished. And it helps you look at, hey, what did we learn? What were some of the causes for some of the things that happened? And how can we get better next time? A pre-mortem is very similar, with 2 big exceptions. The first one being that it actually happens at the beginning of a project instead of at the end. And the second exception being that you actually assume that the project failed. This leverages a really powerful principle called Prospective Hindsight, where you actually imagine that a scenario has occurred, and then you walk back what could be the reasons that would have caused that scenario to happen. And so researchers have actually shown that you get 30% higher likelihood of identifying reasons by going through a scenario planning exercise like this. Gary Klein actually wrote about this concept in a great Harvard Business Review article that I'll link below. The powerful thing about a pre-mortem is that, unlike a traditional brainstorming session where people are talking about what could, what might go wrong, you actually make the assumption that the project failed. And so the question shifts more to what did go wrong. That little shift in mindset makes a big difference in the quality of the conversations you have, the ideas that are generated, and then ultimately the urgency of the organization to do something about that. So how do you do a pre-mortem? Well, typically you bring a diverse group of people in, refer to tip number 1, and you lay out the scenario that the project has failed. Then from there, you host an ideation session where people write down why they think and what the reasons they think are for that failure. And then as a team, you discuss, you rank order them, and then from there you formulate what your action plans are gonna look like. A cool variation of this exercise is to actually pretend that the failed project is on the cover of a newspaper or a really prominent magazine or a trade journal, and basically the news is out. Everybody knows about the project failing, and using that as your starting point. This can make it more real for team members who maybe struggle with abstract ideas but are much more visual, And it actually sparks different ideas and could spark a lot more urgency around taking action. So there you have it. Now you know about optimism bias and a few pro tips that can help you overcome it. If you want to learn more on how to make better decisions, you can download my free guide. It lays out 3 easy steps for you to improve your decision making so that you can amplify your results, you can grow your business, and create lasting impact. Simply go to makebetterdecisionsguide.com and grab your free copy. Also, make sure to leave a comment below. Do you or someone you know struggle with optimism bias? If so, how has it impacted you? Also, which pro tip did you find most useful? And finally, make sure to check out my other videos that talk about other common enemies that can sabotage your decision making and what you can do about them. Thanks for watching. I'll see you soon.